Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe, exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
And it's another Thursday night on KCOR, and you are listening to Exploring the Bizarre. I'm Tim Swartz. Hopefully, Tim Beckley will be with us in a little while. So, unfortunately, you're not going to get to hear our little monologue that we usually like to do every Thursday night, or maybe that's a blessing for some people. I don't know. So instead, we'll just get right into our program, because we have got some really fantastic guests tonight. I mean, we're going to talk about a number of different things, from the Philadelphia experiments to ancient giants, to hopefully maybe even get into the Smoky God and Mount Shasta and the inner Earth. So let me just go right to it here and introduce our guests tonight. First of all, we have Stefan Sindoni. Now, Stefan is a researcher, author, filmmaker, and from an early age, he was an avid reader and spent much of his time learning about American history, ancient civilizations, religions, and Greek mythology. In his quest to uncover ancient truths, he came to the realization that he was an old soul living in a new embodiment. These are just, there are those who claim to predict the future, and Stefan has been given the ability to see into the past, present, and the future by the guidance of the fifth dimension. His body of work includes the following: Sindoni Says, I Am, I Said, The Planet X Factor, Trailer Park Temp Agency, The Legend of J.C. Brown, and his ebook, Below the Radar. Now, also with us tonight is Jason Jarrell, and I think, Jason, your wife, Sarah Farmer, I hope she'll be with us tonight as well. Now, Jason and Sarah Farmer are investigative historians, and I'm going to have trouble pronouncing this, Jason. What is it? A vocational archaeologist. Yay.
Yes.
Hey, I said it. Oh, boy. They study many subjects, including depth psychology, biblical mysteries, political science, and comparative mythology. Now, Jason has presented at conferences on ancient mysteries and appeared on the show Ancient Aliens. Jason and Sarah have also co-written articles published by Alternative Perceptions, Ancient Origins, Road to Ruins, and Ancient American Magazine, and they are the authors of the book Ages of the Giants, a book utilizing genuine archaeological reports and the records of American antiquarians along the numerous historical chronicles and press accounts to document the true history of a distinct subpopulation of large, powerfully built individuals of extraordinary heights who inhabited ancient North America for thousands of years. We call them giants. So, Jason and Stefan, thank you very much for being with us tonight on Exploring the Bizarre.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having me as well.
All right, Stefan, why don't we let you go first, because I know that you would like to start the show off talking about the Philadelphia experiment. Now, and as you know...
What I can do is I will start talking about giants, because I think that will make it more entertaining. So I'm going to start with giants, and I'll end with the Philadelphia if I can.
Go for it. Hey, both the Philadelphia experiment and giants, inner Earth mysteries, we love all of those subjects. So go right ahead.
Well, the past is tied to the present, and the present is tied to the future. It's all one. So we will start with the past, because if we can understand the past, then we'll see where we're going. I'll start by telling the listeners my name is Stefan Abraham Sindoni. I grew up in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. and which is in New York City and Brooklyn. My mother was a Portuguese Jew whose family migrated to England to Scotland. My father was Italian. And my grandmother, of the Italian descent, was born in Rome, about in a town called Formia, about 90 miles from Rome. My grandfather was from Sicily, a place called Milazzo, near Messina. Now, my grandparents, they didn't speak very much English, so I had to learn Italian to converse with them. And it was pretty difficult for someone, whose first language wasn't Italian. But I grew up a Roman Catholic, and my father, he wasn't religious at all. And there's a point to this story. My mother, who taught me scripture from the Old Testament and later the King James Version of the Christian Bible, taught me a lot of things about the Bible, which my biggest interest of it was stories about giants in the Old Testament. There were at least 80 times in the Old Testament that giants were mentioned, so this piqued my interest. One of the earliest mentions of giants could be found in the book of Genesis, chapter 14. The people were called the Amorites, and they were ranging in height from 6 foot to 30 feet in height. So that's pretty tall for giants in those days. The giants were said to be descendants of the biblical Noah of the flood, coming through his grandson's lineage, Canaan, and this can be found in Genesis 10, verse 15 or 16. The Anakim was probably something people are familiar with hearing. They were perhaps the best known of the giants dwelling in the land of Canaan at the time of Exodus, and this can be found in Numbers 13:33. And I preface this because I want anyone listening to be able to see that, I cover things with facts, because when you talk about religious things, you want to be right, because a lot of things people want to believe blindly, so I can't believe blindly. I have to walk a fine line when it comes to fact and fiction. The Amorite, the Anakim, and the Nephilim, which is another one people might have heard of, were all described as giants in the Bible. The most renowned giant of all I can remember reading about was Goliath, the Philistine, that was slain by David. Goliath was said to have stood 9 feet 9 inches tall. So this was a big dude that we're talking about. As I researched the Old Testament even more, I found stories about the giants in the book of Samuel, chapter 16, verse 18, Samuel, chapter 21, verse 15 to 22, and even in Chronicles, chapter 20, verse 48. But after reading about the many accounts of giants and their interaction with the people in those times, I was more than curious about the origin of man. One of the questions I had was, where did these giants come from? Another follow-up question I had was, were these giants visitors from another planet? Could the giants be aliens? And how many biblical accounts can be interpreted as UFOs or alien visitations? The answer was pretty interesting. I came up with there were 10 accounts of aliens, new UFO accounts. We had Jacob's Ladder, the lines of Genesis, the Exodus, the ascension of Elijah, the angels of Sodom and Gomorrah, the sons of God, which were the line of Seth, and their interaction with humans, Zechariah and the flying scrolls, which was a UFO sighting, parting of the Red Sea, a phenomenal event, Ezekiel's wheel, which was depicted as a UFO, and the birth of Christ, where there were wise men who were guided by a light. I pretty much was convinced that the Bible was the greatest alien story ever written. We would have to be naive to believe that we are the only intelligent life in the universe. And so some of my earliest memories as a child were going to a movie theater to watch Saturday's triple features movies, for example, Gulliver's Travels, Jack and the Beanstalk, and Hercules. And all the movies that I was influenced by were all about giants, which I found kind of interesting. Some of my earliest memories as a child were of that. It was around that time I discovered a camcorder, a Kodak camera, and a 33mm projector. And I was about 12 years old, and I was determined to become a cinematographer and create my own documentaries. To add to the great discovery, I had all of the manuals for each of the electronic devices. I would RTM, the acronym for read the manual, and teach myself cinematography, which became one of my greatest passions. And so I did that. Little did I know that years later I would take a job in Florida for a large electronics retailer and become a video sales counselor. And my area of expertise would become camcorders, television, and video products. It was a perfect job for someone who had a natural attraction to multimedia. In a couple of short years, I was producing television commercials and then later using my creative ability to create YouTube videos and creating personal websites. Moving the story along in 2007, I was on the internet looking for ideas for a screenplay that I had planned to write when I came across a book written by Emily A. Frank. Many of the stories in this book featured Mount Shasta. But those of you who are unfamiliar with Mount Shasta, it is located in Northern California, just north of Redding, California. It's a mountain that is over 14,000 feet high. After reading the legend of J.C. Brown, I was magnetized by the legend. I then spent 3 to 6 weeks in the New York Public Library trying to run down the clues that I had read in the book to solve the legend. And I had a hunch that proved correct. I was able to discover the true identity of the man of the legend, and I figured out how it all came to be. But it was as though, Tim, I had firsthand knowledge of the life of J.C. Brown, alias John Benjamin Body.
Mm-hmm. Continue. I'm fascinated by this.
Well, I spent 3 months following the clues in the New York Public Library. And then I hit a bullseye. I came across border crossings for Lord Cowdray, and I go, he really wasn't Lord Cowdray. His real name was Sir Wheatman Pearson. He was knighted in 1917. But in the legend that I read, it said that, he was Lord Cowdray, no mention of Sir Wheatman Pearson. So I contacted the Stockton police, matter of fact. This was in January, actually it was April of 2008 now, and I contacted the Stockton Police Department and told them I could solve the missing persons report because in 1934, J.C. Brown, alias John Benjamin Body, came to Stockton, California, claimed that he had found a mysterious cave opening up in the Cascade Mountain Range where he discovered 27 skeletons, 6.5 to 10 feet tall. And he wanted to enlist people to come with him up to the Shasta area to be able to dig out the remains of some of these findings. And then these people would get rich because of it. And he would keep the mummies that he found in one cave that were dressed in innate robes and appeared to be the king and queen of this civilization, which he believed to be Lemurian. So on the morning of June 19th of 1934, 80 people waited in vain for J.C. Brown to show up to take them off on this expedition, and the police were called, and people waited for vigil for about 48 hours to see, what happened to this man, but no sight. Nothing of him had happened, and people knew that he disappeared, but, they feared foul play, but nobody knew anything. So after reading the story, I became enthralled by it, Tim, and I said, I'm going to solve this legend. And so solving the legend is what I did. I contacted then the editor of the Stockton Record newspaper, who put me in touch with Mike Fitzgerald. And Mike Fitzgerald was very aware of the story of the legend of J.C. Brown. And after speaking to him, he said, how did you get all this information? I says, well, I only got excerpts of it from in a book. He says, well, much more than the book even talked about. So I didn't, let him know exactly how I knew what I knew. But I got his confidence where he sent me a PDF file, which I put up on my SindoniSays.com site, of the actual stories that were put out in the paper in 1934. The one with the initial article about him finding this cave that led under the bowels of Mount Shasta, and then the vigil where people waited on June 19th, where he just mysteriously disappeared. So after doing all this, I think I went on Coast to Coast a couple times talking about it. And I was contacted then by a listener. And a listener lived out in Tacoma, Olympia, Washington. And we became friends. And she said, there's someone that I'd like you to talk to. He's a Native American, and he has a lot to say about giants and the early origins of the Native culture. So I was chomping at the bit, to go out to, the West Coast to meet this man. So I was introduced to the Native American elder, and he was from the Puyallup tribe. I won't mention his name, though, because I would rather keep that anonymous here today, but I can share with you some of the things that he told me, if you like.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Okay, so we were taking a walk around the property when I first met him. And he said to me that, and I was an old soul. And and he said, behind you is Saint Germain, Master Jesus, and there was another gentleman that was with me, and whose name I had never heard before. And I said, wow, I got goosebumps on me. He says, you're not alone. He says, I knew you were coming. He says, I went into meditation, and they said that you were coming. I had to come meet you. So he says, I'm supposed to share my people's early history. So he began by telling me that his tribe had been around for 40,000 years, and they were brought to Earth from a distant planet in another solar system. So he said his ancestors stood between 8 and 9 feet tall. So here they were, the giants, and he referred to them as the tall ones. They wore buckskin clothing, and he even added that his grandfather would see the tall ones, as he referred to them, fishing in the Nisqually River. And this is near Olympia, Washington there. He also told me that during the Ice Age and Great Flood, that the Ant people, which were the Greys, took his people underground to avoid death from the disastrous events. So here it is. I have another tie-in to aliens there and giants.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone, and good night.
Tina, good night. Peter, good night. Carol, good night. Helen, good night.
You've been listening to